Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the second in our Speaking Truth to Power forum here at Mahara Gallery. My name is Bianca Begovic. I was involved in a local campaign where I learned that I had the power to speak truth to power. And is this mic on? And so that's what this forum is about. It's about each one of you and the ability that you all have to do something about the things that you feel passionately about. The speakers on the panel today are all just ordinary people who decided to do something about their particular issues. And in fact, the artist on the walls, John Foster, has spoken truth to power through his artwork. So that's why we have coordinated the forum with the artwork, and I'll get John's daughter Kath to come up and talk a little bit about the artwork on the walls. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thanks for coming along today. I was thinking this morning about this artwork which is called Requiem for the Victims of War, and how my father would be very excited to have people giving this work a new life, because he very much painted it from his own isolated place as an artist, and it was a response to looking at television for the first time, really. So as a kid, and so I'm wearing my television top to celebrate the fact that as a child we didn't have a television, and I think my parents were trying to protect their fragile ways of seeing things, particularly my father. So the minute I left home, and I was the younger daughter, they got a TV. And this was the year this mural was started. So my father obviously sat down and looked at the TV, watched the news, and the Iraq War was on. And he was horrified by the fact that war had become an armchair thing that you could consume. Every night you could see people being bombed and blown up and that kind of thing. And he thought it was awful. And that's what he was doing here, was protesting against war, but also against the way that we see war. And that's the top layer of the mural. So it's in 3 layers. The top layer is all mass media imagery. And he's put it all out there, but he's blasted it through with different ways of seeing things, which is through to fine art, viewing war, and then through to the actual faces of the victims. So he, in his own way, was trying to speak truth to power, and the power he was talking about was the fact that we are often lulled into what we look at. So we go home and we watch TV, and we forget about things like the realities of the victims of war. Anyway, I think my time's nearly up. Yeah. My time is up. So if my father could be here today, he would be very, very excited to think that you people are coming here to be part of a conversation that's about what we're going to do now. So this was painted more than 20 years ago and hasn't been seen until now. It's its first exhibition. But it's got, so thank you. You're a lucky audience, and he's a lucky painter. But you're giving it a new life. So thank you.
So today's speakers are Amanda Vickers, Giovanni Tiso, Ani Parata and Alistair Barry. I'm not going to describe what it is they do, because if you start researching any one of these people, you'll find out they do a myriad of things and they can describe their journeys for you. But what I did discover as we were putting the forum together was that there are 2 umbrella topics under which most of the social injustice and environmental and political and cultural injustice happens today. And one is inequality and the other is climate change. Currently we have 1% of the world's population owning 50% of the wealth, and climate change is perhaps the biggest issue facing us today. I've been reading this book by Naomi Klein called This Changes Everything, about climate change, and I'm going to read a little quote from it. She says, "Our economic system and our planetary system are now at war. What the climate needs to avoid collapse is a contraction in humanity's use of resources. What our economic model demands is unfettered expansion. Only one of these sets of rules can be changed, and it's not the laws of nature. Either we will change our ways and build an entirely new kind of global society, or they will be changed for us." So I'll just let that sink in for a minute. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about a movement away from a society which is unfair and away from a society which is completely dependent on fossil fuels, which is currently what we're living in, and it's not working for us. But each one of us can do something about those things, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is the different levels of doing something. Peter Healy is the artist in the other room, and he's come up with the artwork that's on the front of your agenda here, which says, to change everything, we need everybody. Each speaker will talk for about 5 minutes about their particular issue, and then we'll have 10 minutes of cross-panel discussion, and I'll ask you just to hold your questions until the end, in the interest of hearing from every single one of the speakers. We are being recorded here. We had a situation last week where someone didn't want to be recorded, and so if you could just go up to either Gary over here or Graham afterwards or myself and let them know if you'd rather that you were edited out of the final cut, that would be great. The other thing that happened excitingly last week is that we went well over time and everybody stayed. So if we are going over time and you want to make your way out quietly at 1 o'clock, there's no problem with that. And there's a possibility Alistair may have to do exactly that at the time. So just wanted to let you know that that's totally fine. So that's enough from me. I'll hand it over to Amanda Vickers now. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. My name's Amanda, and Bianca invited me here today because I decided to stand as an independent candidate in the local election, and I guess that was just something I was doing because I felt passionate about my cause. Now, my cause is monetary reform, and it just sounds so boring. But the truth is, I'm going to put some excitement into it, okay? Because if we reform the monetary system, this climate change and inequality that we see is inextricably linked to it. So it's something we really need to look at. And I just wanted to try and make it really simple. And the quote from Bianca just now from her book, from Naomi Klein, it's really said it all. We have a system where we require further and further economic growth. And if our economy doesn't have constant economic growth, it will collapse or go into a recession and then a depression. And that's why our politicians are always beating on about that. And the economy must come first. And it's at the expense of everything else. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a good economy, they're not going to get voted in. But why do we need the economic growth? And what I found is that, when I looked into that, was that we have a debt-based money supply where nearly every New Zealand dollar in our economy that anybody has in their bank account is backed by a debt somewhere else. It's all linked into existence as credit, because that's the way the system works. And that was okay in the old days when we had plenty of resources and the economy was, there was a lot of growth and we could sustain that. But we're getting to the limits now, especially with things like climate change and inequality that we see. So it's not actually working for us anymore. So what we're doing collectively as a society is we are collectively paying, we're servicing the debts that we collectively have to these credit institutions, which are the banks. Now, what that means is we need to consume more all the time, we need an ever-expanding money supply, we need ever-expanding debt, and we need ever-expanding economic growth. I've said that. So basically, we can't have both. We cannot address climate change and stop it in its tracks without having an economic collapse. And we cannot have a healthy, thriving economy and stop climate change and the other way around. So we're doomed if we do and we're doomed if we don't, really, with the current system. And when I figured this out, I got really upset, and that's what led me to do all my reading and get to the point where I stood as an independent candidate, because I mean, even for climate deniers, there's so many other reasons to do it. We need more resource use. We need to convert our resources to GDP. We're polluting our environment. We need to take on more debt. That's adding to the poverty we see. We've got a high debt to GDP ratio, and in so many ways it affects all of us in every aspect of our life. So I see it as one of the most fundamental things we can be doing, and I have been trying to get that message out. So I've just been following a lot of money reform movements, and they've got quite a lot of really good stuff to say, and they're really just saying, let the banks only lend out the money they've actually got, and that's the basis of it. And that's a really simple summary of monetary reform, and I'm happy to answer questions later. But really not many people understand it, or why we're always beating on about economic growth. And so it's a conversation that needs to be had. And I really decided to get involved with trying to find solutions for mankind, and I looked at peak oil, and then I understood about peak resources, and I understood that we needed an ever-expanding economy, and one thing led to another, and I got involved with these movements. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you find something really important, if you just get involved in it, it moves with you. You find the next thing you're meant to be doing, and you find you can make a difference almost organically because you're doing what feels right to you. So from now on, I'm just going to be trying to educate people and reforming the money system. And I'm hoping to be at the Sustainable Home and Garden show too. So if anybody wants to come and have another talk, then I'll be there as well.
Giovanni, would you like to take it?
Thank you. Kia ora tātou. It's a pleasure to be here. Right, I've been billed as a social person who's on social media, so what I thought I might do is I might talk about social media as a tool for public intellectual work, which to me is the same thing as speaking truth to power. Now, after the results came in from the last election, we heard a lot of people in the media and on newspapers talk about this idea of the social media bubble, and how there might be people who sectors of the left who spend all their lives in an insulated echo chamber, each reinforcing their own views, and therefore being completely unable of influencing a wider public, which is a pretty strong charge to bring to a left-wing movement. Now, I think by and large that's a very unfair charge. And it sort of doesn't. I don't think there really are a lot of people who operate like that. But I also think that it discounts the fact that any social context is potentially a bubble. Your workplace is a bubble, your neighborhood is a bubble, and the circumstances of your social class is probably the thickest bubble of all, the thing that is really hard to get out of. I think social media do give us an opportunity to do political work that actually crosses boundaries between different social contexts and enable us to communicate with each other. In my personal trajectory through this thing, I suppose my 15 minute of fame came a couple of years ago when I was involved in a campaign against a radio show on Radio Live around the time of Rossbusters. And this campaign led to the show being cancelled, which wasn't what I was aiming to do at all. I mean, it was an outcome, I didn't think it was a particularly worthwhile outcome in itself. But what I was trying to do is I was trying to keep in the public conversation for a little bit longer what I thought at the time was a critical discussion we were having about how we talk about rape in New Zealand. I thought that was really, really important. And it sort of achieved that as a secondary aim, I suppose. But that is a very good example of the kind of thing that we can do right now with social media. We can, we don't have the same kind of influence as the mainstream, and we're not going to have it for a long time. We can't do the work of journalists because we don't have the organizations, we haven't created the organizations that they have behind them. But we are able to influence the mainstream. We're able to talk to journalists, we're able to talk to politicians. We are able to talk to each other. We're able to do things, fairly fundamental things, like educating each other, which is a very strong tradition that the left has, across territorial distances. We're able to talk, different political groups are able to talk to each other, which is also critically important. And the third thing that we should be doing, but we're probably not doing quite well enough, is looking after each other. That's something that we need to learn to do on social media a lot better than we are. Sort of my experience is as an immigrant. I came to New Zealand, did all my studies here, and my main area of political activism is disability and education, which is the experience of a migrant is marginal enough. The experience of talking about disability and education is even more marginal. And to the extent that I've been able to create a public for my writings, it's not a huge public. It's nothing that rivals to the mainstream, but it's not unimportant. It's not irrelevant. And if any of you has that kind of aspiration, I can guarantee you, that the entry level to this kind of public intellectual and political work is almost non-existent right now. You get a computer and you get on the internet, and it's pretty much what you need to do. You start a blog, you get in touch with people who feel the same way as you do about things. It is, I'm not saying it's for everyone. I'm not saying it's without risks, because being exposes you to risk, as we know after dirty politics has been made abundantly clear to us, and I've experienced some of that. But by and large, I think the potential rewards are much greater than the risk you have. That's my thing. Yeah.
And Ani Parata.
I'm here because Bianca asked me. But for change, I was trying to think, what was I going to talk about? I'm descendant from here. My ancestors came here from Taranaki. I have walked away. I've lived in a very sheltered life when I was a child. Come from a family of 14, lived in Pukekohe Bay. Didn't know there was any difference between me being Māori and the rest of my classmates. I thought we were just all equal. And I grew up in that society, and I didn't know there was any difference until I married into the Parata family here in Waikanae, and I'm originally from Waikanae. My grandparents came down with Te Rauparaha, my great-great-grandparents. They didn't return back to Taranaki when they went back to protect Taranaki lands confiscation, and they stayed here. So there was two major families that stayed here in Waikanae, and I'm descendant from one of them, and married the other one. So I equally have responsibility for my mukupunas to show them that we can all live in a good relationship with each other. And I have been in political arenas before. I've just got myself probably into trouble in New Plymouth because I've just made a comment about what's going on up there between Māori and non-Māori on their council. Because way back in '94, when we started here, I was the first Māori on local government in a general seat, only one in a general seat. It can be done. And I must admit, I didn't win on the night. I won from divine intervention because the chap that was ahead of me died 2 weeks after. And I'm always thankful for him. But, I'm thankful in some ways, but not thankful in other ways. But we started to talk about communications with Māori and local government. And we actually had a fantastic model. But I'm one of these fortunate people that have been around for a while and seen a repeat happening. That we've actually gone right round in a circle from '94 to actually be repeating what we set up when the Local Government Association came in and talked about consultation with Māori and working with Māori. And had we carried on with the model that we originally set up in '94, we may have had never had the things that are going on now with the Māori ward seat. I don't agree with them, but I don't agree with them, but I agree better communication and relationships needs to happen. And the reason we didn't agree with them is that way back in '94 was because we thought that the best way to be would be that we would sit outside and give our alternative value system from a Māori perspective. And then we wouldn't be owned by the ratepayers or anybody else. We would be giving our views independently from getting money from anybody to do it. So I've had a colourful time on this community. Very much part of the restoration of whakarongoto, so I know what it's like to work with your people. I know how difficult it can be sometimes, and I know how far the visionary people are forward than the people that are coming behind you. I've been told all my life I'm 10 years ahead of everybody, And when you start to accept that you actually are, you know, and I know that that should never stop me. In one part there, I pulled back and said, well, if I'm 10 years ahead, I'll let them catch up. But the problem is they don't catch up and we repeat the cycle. So we actually have to lay out the foundations in front of us to where we want our next generation to go. And I had many thoughts that I wanted to talk about today, or what I was here for. But I'm going to give you one example that I think that it's always been deep in my heart, and a lot of people don't know the story, and that was getting rid of the rats on Kapiti, and what we had to do that. And we had a system that went perfectly. How it never continued on, I don't know. But I was over there 3 weeks ago, walking on the new track, and I always think, thank goodness we stuck in when people wanted to stop us, you know, and there was a time for that. They wanted to stop us from, when my husband died, they wanted to stop it and start it again, and we stuck in there. And, you know, back then in 95, it wasn't an easy thing to do with my own as Māori and with the other communities who wanted it to be done. So I've come through knowing that we have probably the most important thing for any change, whether it's in climate, environment or anything, is about having a relationship. And the strongest word that comes from me, from my Māori perspective, is the fact that there was a word that we learned very early in our life, and it was called manaakitanga. It was about uffing everybody. So our old people, when the swaggers were walking down the road and they needed a cup of tea, they got a cup of tea. Those things were about looking after people in your area. And I think manaakitanga I'm always reminding my own of that value, is that people came here to stay, look after them. If you're mana whenua, and I am of here, you do that. You make sure everybody comes in understanding where you're coming from. Don't worry, there's been plenty of times they haven't understood me. But, you know, I have a big job to do in the next year or so, or maybe more, that I have to take our treaty claim through. To Waikanae, we put a claim in 1989. And I have to take this claim through because no one actually understands it better than what we originally set into in 89 when we put the claim in, about our injustices, not about blaming anybody. It was about the injustices that were done. And if you're in anybody been in law, the biggest injustice that was ever done was when we parata versus the Bishop of Wellington, and they said the treaty was a nullity. That is the biggest claim that we hold over our head here, and well, it was proven to be wrong. And all we want is an apology back to this from the Crown that they got it wrong and it affected our country and put us back a long time because we're only just settling now in 88. So my job is it's a bit scary, but I think if I can do it, anybody can do it. You know, I left Pukura Bay School. Went to TED. I left school when I was 15. I was a young mum, and it is about going forward and trying to bring the best from my grandchildren. And my grandchildren are the people that carry our memories on, their memories about us. And whatever we do, they will remember whether we did it good or whether we did it bad, because somebody would have written about it. And we have lived that in the Māori history. And Sandra Lee, when I got into local government, said to me, don't try and change the world, make sure you record that you did try though. And so I leave that on that word, that Sandra Lee was my mentor when I got into local government, and I got in to stop the sewage system going out to the beach out here. I no regrets, it's not out there yet, you know, but our rivers are not in good condition. And that I'm sad, because I think local government could have done a lot more for our rivers. So I'm just a believer in good relationships, good environment for the next lot of generation, that this picture is the most amazing thing that I have ever seen, and it's so true. What he's got there is when we came into that situation, that picture tells us all. And we actually have to get back and be a picture of the green, of the environment and our birds and everything else. Kia ora tātou.
And finally, Alistair Barry.
Thanks very much, Bianca. Just following on, I suppose, the theme that has been developed by the other speakers. I'm just an ordinary guy who wasn't quite sure he was up to much, but have ended up keeping on surprising myself and perhaps others by what is achievable, in your bedroom with a video editing setup or whatever. So if I go back to my early 20s, mid-20s, I thought that a useful thing for me to do, since I wasn't a particularly good writer, so otherwise I might have become a journalist, I thought, well, maybe I could make films. Then of course the question is what to make films about was useful, and so I thought, it might be interesting to find out how New Zealand became involved in the Vietnam War, which, when you think about it, for someone who's about 25 or 26, seems a rather ambitious endeavour at the time. But nevertheless, I taught myself how to do basic research by going to the Wellington Public Library and getting librarians to help me get various books and looking at the references and so forth, and eventually got some help inside television, and then did the interviews, and we made a television series. I guess the person who was most important in supporting me there was Ian Johnston, who was the grand old man of public broadcasting at the time, and so that was where I particularly thought, well, little old me, I can go and find out stuff in our country and present it to my fellow citizens. As the years went by, I became more refined, I guess, and committed to the idea of what I was trying to do and what I have endeavoured to do over the years, which is to explain how politics in New Zealand really works, so that by doing that, we as citizens are empowered because we know more correctly what are the levers to pull, what are the actions that we can take, what are the things that are a bit of a waste of time, and so my film projects, using the medium of documentary to communicate this, have been about that. And so after the Vietnam film, in fact at the same time I did a film with a colleague of mine about democracy in a trade union. It was called Wildcat, and it was a feature-length film about a struggle that was going on inside the South Auckland branch of the Timber Workers Union in the late 1970s, where there were some corrupt union officials who were being opposed by others who were trying to organise things. So we looked at how trade union works and how trade unionism works. Then there was the story of how we became involved in the Vietnam War. And, I wrote a nice letter to Keith Holyoake and said he was, at the time, no longer in power. He was a Minister of State or something at the time, shortly before his retirement, and got a letter back and went along and spent an hour talking to him, along with some of the important figures, behind-the-scenes figures in foreign affairs. So another project that I did some years later was a film which ended up to be a documentary called Nuclear Free Pacific, which was an attempt to look, or not an attempt, it was a project to look at the making of the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty. Here we had this Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, which involved a whole lot of countries in the South Pacific, somehow or other managing to get together and having the political will to create this international treaty, which banning certain nuclear activities in the region. And so I made that, researched that, and was able to go and get some funding, and we went and interviewed lots of people who had been involved with that, South Pacific leaders, around the place and edited it into a film which was transmitted on television, and so we got a good audience. Fortunately, we didn't get the audience that I really wanted, which was audience in Northern Europe, where they were debating at the time having a South Pacific nuclear free zone in the Baltic region. The biggest change really for me happened in 1996. I decided to make a film about the way in which the Rogernomics revolution had occurred. Why did it occur? Politically, why did it occur? How did it occur? Why wasn't there a resistance? Why were the people unable to stop this thing, which the vast majority of New Zealanders were opposed to, happening? And so I made a film called Someone Else's Country, which was a sort of a big hit in 1996. Out of that, after that film came out, I thought, well, perhaps I could repeat the formula once again, and I did a film about unemployment. How come we used to be a country of full employment up to, in fact, the mid-80s or the early 1980s, and then we became a country with the standard Western unemployment levels of around 5 to 6%, and I researched that and made a film called In a Land of Plenty, which managed to get on TV, and so it was seen by a lot of our fellow citizens. I did a film then about education, and then I did a film on Nicky Hager's book, The Hollow Men, which seemed an obvious thing for me to do. Sadly, when I came to do that film, I rang up Nicky as soon as the book came out and said, Nicky, I'd like to do this film. And I expected that a lot of other film producers or filmmakers would have been keen to, would have been ringing up too. In fact, there wasn't anybody, which is sort of a bit of a sad aspect of my life as it's coming to, so I'm now in my mid-60s, that other people haven't joined in. It's not that hard, I mean, I got UE, but I didn't get a university degree. My auntie called me an historian, and I was rather taken back at that, but I suppose I am. My last film that I made was called Hot Air. I'm trying to get it out and about now. It was shown on Māori television the last day of last year, and now I'm trying to get it up on the internet and sell DVDs and so forth. So these things I've been able to fulfil that original idea, and I think it's anybody really can. I remember reading Nicky Hager saying that really being a researcher, being an investigative journalist, is just a fancy word for becoming interested in the topic, pursuing it until you know what you're talking about, and then presenting it back to our fellow citizens, and so giving them some power, giving us some power to do something more about it. So my next project that I'm sort of starting to read about is about inequality in New Zealand and how we used to regard ourselves as the Sweden of the South Pacific when I was a kid, and we were supposed to be proud of egalitarianism was a word that was used to characterise New Zealand. How did we end up so rapidly to be in the state we are today? So maybe, of course, there's all those things about money and so forth, but maybe that'll be something for me to end my working life with, and I'll feel reasonably satisfied with my efforts. Ta.
So there we are. There's the challenge of 4 ordinary people that are doing something about the things that they feel passionately about. So I was reading the paper this morning, and that's what's in today's paper. This is a sinkhole. Excuse me. Which scientists believe was formed by methane gas released due to climate change. Don't know if any of you have seen that, any of our speakers today. And then in the same paper today we have this article about the gridlock. How can one tree on a railway line near Pororua and a car crash on the motorway to Hutt Valley leave an entire city in gridlock all the way to the airport? Don't know if anybody read that today. Okay. So my area of interest is sustainability and particularly climate change. So this can make us feel very powerless. Reading the newspaper in general can make you feel really powerless. But I'm a mum of 3 children and I try and bike to school every day. I have 1 child on the back in a seat and 2 on their own bikes. And I feel like a bit of a weirdo because not many of the other mums do that. But when I do that, when I get over that feeling, it's an act of power. When I wake up on a Sunday morning and I want a cup of tea but I don't have any milk and I can't be bothered biking, so I choose to go without milk, that's an act of power. When I write a letter to the editor saying congestion is caused by individual people taking their car instead of catching the train, that's an act of power. Not all of us are chosen to stand up or become filmmakers or represent council or have popular blogs or run for as an independent. But where there are a myriad of things and ways that we can speak truth to power. And Arnie touched on it when she talked about manaakitanga and us in our own spheres, about how we step up and do things. And that's relating back to what Peter Healy said about all of us having to do something. So I'm going to issue a challenge to all of you, which is a really radical idea of a car-free day. We used to have it, and my tip for all of us speaking truth to power is perhaps trying a car-free day once a week. And if you can't do once a week, try once a fortnight or once a month. So that's my challenge for each of us using our truth to power. I'd like you to do more. I know there's some musicians and photographers in the audience that could use their skills, and some bloggers, but that's my challenge up to you. So to the panellists, I'd like you all just to think about what's the one thing that you'd like to present to the audience that they can take away to speak truth to power. So I'll take the mic down and pass it along.
So is that question of reference to what we've done?
If you want to, yeah, on any level about how you think that it goes. You have to turn it on.
Well, with respect to, within the economy, which has to grow, if we've got any chance of addressing any of our climate change or environmental problems, I would encourage people to personally, on a personal level, I think it's really important we get out of any debt we're in. But in terms of the national economic position, it's probably next best to have a bank account with Kiwibank, because although they create money as credit, the profit from that actually goes back into the New Zealand economy rather than to the overseas Australian banks, so that's one thing. Other than that, credit unions such as the Cooperative and the TSB are a good place. I mean, they're not fundamentally solving the basic problem, because as a collective whole, as a country, we're still completely in debt because all our money is traced back to debt. But on an individual level, that's probably one of the best things we can do in terms of the money supply. But I think Bianca's question is also in terms of us personally. Not everybody is as interested in money like I am. So really, I think what I suggest people do is find where the fire is in your belly. Like what rots your socks? What gets you going? What do you read in the paper that says, oh, I'm getting really annoyed about reading about that and it's not right? And you realise that that's your calling. And so then you can, I'm wanting you to read more, just find a bit more, just be a bit more informed. And it's really easy these days, as Giovanni said, with the internet. It's just a simple Google search often, but often there's community groups and all sorts of things. And it doesn't take long to do one step at a time, to just be contributing to a movement or, or the energy in an area that because it's all connected in different ways, and that's your way of contributing to moving society in a better direction. So that's what I'd like you guys to go home and do. By the way, you've all done the first step by coming here today, so thank you.
Yeah, sort of adding on to what I was saying earlier, sharing in your knowledge and sharing in your political aspirations with a group that is outside of your immediate social group is incredibly empowering. And I think when we talk about things like, the social media bubble or any other sort of bubble is, okay, I don't think it's true, but at the same time, it is a good question to be asking yourself when you do something like that is, am I bringing something to this that wasn't already there before? Because that's a problem. I mean, it becomes any social context becomes an echo chamber when there is no connection with anything outside, and you're really just recycling ideas or opinions that are already there to begin with. So I think it's that double thing of wanting to find people that you can connect with, so that you can do things together, and then bringing your experience to it. And your experience is always going to be unique. Your set of experiences is always going to be unique. And I think we've got ways of doing that now that are really that mean that however much time you want to put into it, it doesn't have to completely consume your life, but you can do that on a fairly, you can put initially a fairly small investment in it, and you can modulate it up to really allowing it to take away your life. So if you can, obviously, if you're in that situation. So yeah, I think that's just challenging. I'm not challenging you I'm challenging, I see it as a personal challenge, and it's something that I think is good to know. It's good to know.
Well, I think it would have to be relationships, and I think for me to have a good relationship with my community, it starts with me, but it starts with me and my family. And I think relationships is probably something that I've been going over for a little while over this year, having to do within my own family, because that will reflect back out to others. And I think our relationships are not that good, and ask yourself, is it good with you in your home? Because our children think that they know it all. And, my mokopuna said to my daughter the other day, but how did Nan know? She's Nan. They actually don't realise that we've actually had a life, that we've actually lived in this world, and it was really important because she didn't know how to talk to me, and I was actually a bit disappointed about that, because she talked to me before about the same situation. But what I found within my own family, that this system that he's painted, so we're clearly there about what's taken over our minds, is taking our children's minds over worse. And actually we have to put a bit of effort in to making good memories. I've done, in my situation, I'm very lucky to have traditional land at Waikanae that we can't build on, that we can't subdivide because it's landlocked, and there's too many of us, making up a campsite and showing some simple things about sitting out there and talking. And one of the things that my son said, but how come you never told me this story about my grandparents? My grandparents lived in Hongaweika, and my grandfather was Irish. So he had a really big impact on how they grew food there, because he was a gardener. And he knew the seed, how to use the seed and the composting and the seed and things like that. They didn't know any of these stories because we never talk about it in our home, because there's a distraction. And I think that that's where it started with me. So they came out, and I managed to get my son to clear a place for me to have a campsite. And then they didn't realise that that was all there. And then we brought some of the other families down to have another look at it, to come in and have tea with us one day. They thought it was amazing. We grew up knowing that was quite normal. Our children today don't know the environment, the white caps on the sea. They don't actually see how important that is to have those clear images in your mind, and not just all the clutter that comes from that side of the system. And I'm only trying that out with me, and I'm hoping that it will succeed out further with others. And I approach the claim the same way, is that the clutter we have, that all the baggage that's come on top of us, is clouding how we could see it simple. and deal with it in a simple way, but after what happens after. Because if anybody's had a look at both sides, being Māori and being non-Māori, as I have, and there's faults on both sides, let me tell you. And it's tougher being Māori and dealing with Māori, because they lived in two worlds too. But you know, we grew up in two worlds. I did, with my Irish grandmother, Irish grandfather, my English grandmother, I think. But she was actually adopted and brought up as a Māori. So she was a native speaker. She was native in every way but her colour. So I grew up, and I bring those back into my everyday life today. Those are the stories we're not sitting around telling our children, because we think that they're not interested. But, you know, put them in environments that they will be. The world will change, and it changes one little thing at a time and one community. I can't look outside Waikanae at the moment because, and the Kapiti Coast, because that's who I'm from. But what we can change, we did a change when we did the rat eradication on Kapiti. We made a change over there. We put a marine reserve where we had everybody against us. And we put it in there because we knew if we didn't do something, something would happen. And I was one of those new pioneers with that as Māori. We got hammered by Māori. But are they hammering us now? No, they're not. 20 years later, everybody's glad we did this. Because it benefits, I always said this when I was on the Conservation Board, whatever Māori make a fight over an environment, it benefits everybody. It doesn't just benefit them as a people. When they go back to that place of old within them that their ancestors had taught them, it will benefit our country environmentally. And that's where the government doesn't listen. It gets people who will tick box what they want to do. And I'm not one of them, as you all know, with the expressway I wasn't. You know, I didn't agree with it, still don't. But then it's going ahead. How's the best way we can get things done is to have the communication with them. And I do when I'm not happy about something. I'll go and say so. And because that's what you do. You know, I've accepted that it's going through, but environmentally, if there's things that are going on, I want to know why. And you know, I think that's just what we have to do here. You know, Waikanae and the Kapiti Coast is an amazing place, and we don't want it to lose that connection with the island and the birds coming back. Or I don't want to see all the work that I've done and been hammered for negatively about the island or about this waterway out here. I want to know that it was worthwhile. I want people to say it was worthwhile because I can go out there and fish, and we're getting fish out of the marine reserve. You know, and that is what I've learned since the Maori Land March in 1975, when I found out that actually what is Māori and who are we. And we found out in 75 there were some things that went wrong, and there was a movie made about it by amateur movie makers, which people should see. They don't put that out there and tell you that history. But when we do get to build our relationship, if we're unsure, ask somebody. If I get it wrong and you think I've offended you, tell me, because I won't know. You need to ask, what did I really mean? But I have just the benefits of all my cultures, which is Irish and Māori. And when they married the Māoris, they gave us a double dose of everything, let me tell you. I think that we get to learn to adapt, and we can make a better place for our mokopunas, and they can tell a wonderful story about how successful we were to get back the environment that we used to have. And I think that would be a fabulous story to write. Kia ora.
I'll just go to the opposite extreme, if you like, about thinking about this sort of thing. At the heart of neoliberalism, which is the technical term given to the Watchanomics revolution and so forth that we've experienced, is the idea that history is of no consequence, that in Margaret Thatcher's words, society doesn't exist and we are all just, if you like, we're individuals, and while we may have interesting things like families, essentially the most important thing that we are as individual economic actors in this world. So history doesn't exist. This is a problem which can be addressed very simply. If you think about members of the ACT Party, when they go up and talk, you'll never hear them talking about our past or the great things that we've done in the past. The thing that we've all been talking about is our past, and if we were trying to think of a simple way of describing how we might improve New Zealand, I think a lot of us would, and certainly I would start talking about the things in the past, recreating things, recovering things that have happened in the past. So the things that would make New Zealand a better place into the future can be described by taking stories from our past, and be it ideas that were generated here in New Zealand as a unique, someone having a brilliant idea, for example, like the Queen's Chain, which doesn't exist or didn't exist anywhere else in the world, and some bright spark thought it up. Or the creation of the welfare state itself in New Zealand, which was the result of three guys down in Otago, where they were building a bridge over a river. The local minister and a teacher and another guy used to spend their evening talking around, drinking cups of tea, because they're teetotalers, drinking cups of tea and talking about how to create the welfare state, and that is what they achieved in 1938, which was far in advance even in the UK. So I think we can look into our past when we're talking to our own children and talk about, easily find examples of the way things can be improved from our own, by telling our own stories about our own families, about our own communities and our own society in a larger sense. So it sort of happens at the level of historians, and it happens locally as well. On a cheerful note, I was walking by the Waikanae Gallery a couple of weeks ago, and I saw four trout swimming upstream.
Thanks, Alistair. Okay, so it is 2 o'clock now, but we are going to open it up to anyone who has any questions. So does anyone, if there any question they want to ask one of the panelists? Yep. Unfortunately, we can't put the mic over.
My question's for Alistair. Have you found anything filmable in the Dirty Politics saga?
So the question was if I found anything filmable in the Dirty Politics saga. I read the book, and most stories most things can be somehow or other massaged into a film. I mean, The Hollow was a tricky one, trying to turn a whole lot of leaked emails into an hour and a half movie. It is possible. I think that it could be made into a useful resource, but I just take one project at a time. Wouldn't it be great if there's someone else out there thinking along these lines as we speak? I did get an email from an acquaintance in Auckland telling me that I really had to make this film now, but I'm not going to. I'm doing something else.
Anyone else?
I just wonder if any of the panel have any ideas on how to reverse neoliberal economics.
Okay, how long is a piece of string? What's the meaning of life in the universe and everything? That's a very difficult question, but really what it comes down to me is, how are we going to reclaim some of our power as people, or take it away from corporations who seem to be running our country? And for me, it always comes back to, people power. We have to individually reclaim. And it's a lot, for me, about being a conscious consumer, choosing what we buy, choosing who we support, I've got this bee in my bonnet that it's actually really difficult to know sometimes what we're buying, where it came from, what sweatshops, what country, what conditions, what bad stuff's in the food. I've decided I need to clone myself. I need 5 of myself for my ideas, but one of my ideas is to have an app for a phone so people can scan any product and get all the information.
It exists.
Yeah, but
it does exist.
Yeah, I've seen something, but it's not. Yeah, it's not specific.
Ethical.
It's for ethical, but I'm wanting across the spectrum, everything from anyway. I'm getting off track. So that sort of thing, being a conscious consumer, and talk to other people about being a conscious consumer, and of course, I guess vote appropriately.
To me, yeah, you're reversing it. It's almost, I think, the kind of problem where you don't want to think about it in economic terms. It's a political system, it's not an economic system, and it's about taking democracy away. So any situation that you see where you can either introduce or reintroduce democracy, and it can be anything, that's how you reverse neoliberalism. You create democratic institutions where they didn't exist anymore or where they've been removed, and that's how you do it. Don't want to make it sound too simple.
This being my specialist subject, I think that's a brilliant reply.
Could you say it again then, please, because I couldn't quite...
Oh, sorry. Is this on? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. I don't know that it's necessarily an economic problem. I think it's a political problem, and it's because neoliberalism operates by taking democracy away. So either you put it back, or you introduce democracy where it didn't exist anymore. Because I'm not particularly nostalgic about going back to the New Zealand of the 70s or the Italy of the 70s, since where I'm from. I'm not nostalgic of that kind of social democratic system that wasn't really working that well. But I think we can aspire to do better, and what Alistair was saying about the fact, we can be innovative and we can think new things ourselves. We don't need to always go back. But I kind of look at every economic problem as a problem of democracy. And, okay, how can we actually make people decide this? And if you apply it in practical terms, TPPA, we don't want it. Not because it's irrational or it's not a good way of getting goods to go around, it's because it removes democracy. That's all you need to know about a trade agreement. Is it going to take power away from people? Yes, so we don't want it. Does that...
Somebody said, watch the way you vote, but that's part of the problem because the analysis that Labour Party has is still extremely primitive, and they don't seem, they say we need to produce more, so there's more jobs. That's all I've heard them say. I want to hear them say more than that.
Well, voting is not going to do anything because Labour is as wedded to neoliberalism as nationalism. It's not going to make a difference. I think I don't want to make it sound too simple. But basically, I give you that answer because it's my personal answer whenever I think of I apply it to education, I apply it to things that are in my life. Because it's very hard to think of how to undo our whole system. But if you think about it in terms of the democracy that has been removed for it, and if you look at Alistair's films, you can see all that, you can see every step of that. Then you build political movements designed to reintroduce the democracy. And then we worry about the financial side of it. The financial side of it comes later. First of all, let us make decisions, and then we'll see if at the end of the day we are still solvent as a country. I think we can make our own decisions.
I'd like to just give a quick answer to that. I do agree with voting accordingly, but also I'd like to say spend less money. And the way that you can do that is by biking instead of using your car. You can grow as much of your own food as you possibly can, and you can buy second-hand clothes. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
I've been quite struck today by how modest and self-effacing everybody on the panel has been. a view of your collective and individual achievements. And I wondered if there's something in the New Zealand character, and maybe Giovanni, you've adopted this by now in this country, but maybe, is there something about us as New Zealanders which makes it more difficult, because we are so inclined to say, oh, all right, and back away when facing opposition. Is there something about us as New Zealanders that makes it more difficult for us to speak truth?
No. The question is.
Sorry, just passing it.
The question is there something inherent in the New Zealand character which makes it more difficult for us to speak truth to power? I think that no, it is the exact opposite. I think it's one of the things that has enabled me to do what I've been able to do, and all of us be able to do, is because we're a small country. Because we can go and talk to the Prime Minister, if you like. We can talk to our local. There is this personal connection, and some of the biggest buzzes that I've had. Let me tell you two. One was getting off the train because I kept going into town to do editing work, and there was this young Māori guy got on at Porirua station, kept on looking at me. He was just across the seat, and eventually, when we got off the train in Wellington, he said, "Oh, you Alistair Barry?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Man, my mate's got your film Someone Else's Country out of the Porirua Public Library and looked at it." So that's at one sort of level, this ability to communicate amongst ourselves. At the other extreme, if you like, was I was waiting to do a research interview with David Parker a few years ago in relation to the making of this latest film called Hot Air, and I had to wait in his office for quite a long time, and eventually he came bursting in through his this is in Parliament, through his outer office into his inner office, and I had my little list of questions there and my tape recorder that I was going to ask him if I could use it to record his replies. And he came up, "Alistair, let me shake your hand. Congratulations, how are you? This is a privilege to meet you." And, "What? What's this?" I was already taken aback, and he went round behind his desk and he said, "Look, I wonder if you'd mind signing a copy of In the Land of Plenty. In fact, I've got two here. They're both pirated, but would you mind putting your signature on them?" So we're a small country.
Yes, but you're saying that power is accessible, and that's a different issue from the one that I raised, which is about how we confront power. And not. I mean, yes, we can walk in the grounds of Parliament. There are lots of countries where we wouldn't be able to just wander through and do all of that. And I've often thought that was a wonderful thing, that we, to that extent, politicians, if you get to know them, you can use their first names. That they wander around without all the kind of security and around them. But so power is accessible, but we as people are often self-effacing often. In situations where we should be more strident or should actually speak up more. I mean, all of you have spoken up. But we as people let all that happen in the 1980s. We didn't speak up.
Well, yeah, certainly. Just one comment. I saw a wonderful film called Pride recently.
Yes.
That addresses it.
No? Just thinking about what you're talking about, like I can remember Springbok tour, and like New Zealand, a lot of New Zealanders have a really strong voice for that. And I was about 9 or 10 years old, and at my workplace, I talked to the young people there about some things going on in their workplace that I've got to read with them, how we've been paid and stuff. They have no idea about unions.
We can't hear it.
Oh, sorry.
Afraid you're going to have to speak you through.
What I'm talking about is at my workplace, there's quite a few young people who don't know anything about unions, and they don't know the history behind the difficulties people have gone through to get what we've got today. And I don't know how to get the first example I made. One of the things was the Springbok tour, for example. You know, that changed everything. So New Zealanders do have an ability to have a voice. I think we're just, my view is that, well, I've become apathetic. You know, I do little about these things. Having said that, in the last couple of years, I think I've written 2 letters to the editor of the local paper. I've had a photography exhibition about something I felt strongly about. So I'm starting to do something, and I think that's how the change comes about, isn't it? By individual people doing something. You know? So there you go.
Thanks. Anyone else got any? Yeah, right at the back. I'm sorry we can't because it's on a cord, so you just have to do the best that we can.
Just coming along from what you've just been speaking about, I'm 3 weeks retired after 35 years in the same employment. I actually was involved with the Springbok as well, but I had the freedom as a student. And I found that today the people lack courage to be able to activate these feelings and to do something about it, because they're locked into a system of employment where there are things plastered all around the place. As a team we work better, and there's terrible disapproval if you rock the boat, and you're also locked down into things being confidential to certain zones. So I don't think the young people today have the freedom we had, and therefore they don't have the courage. They have a lot more to lose than what I had at that age. Does anyone want to?
I think one of the things in our headlines of our paper this week was, and I recognise what you're saying, because when I started in local government, that was the reason I didn't want to be there, and it was hard to do. But when I got in there and I found out that I had to, all our meetings were run by the Westminster way, I couldn't believe why we couldn't have a Kiwi way. That we're actually in the council, we're Kiwis, and yet we had to run our meetings based on Westminster ways in England, from England. And even today we still run things on an English background. We're actually not still being Kiwis. And you know, my son said he'll be at Waitangi Day at Parliament and Government House in year 200, you know, the 200th anniversary of the Treaty of Waitangi. That can happen if we start to make a stand about, you know, that we can have a say, and we actually do want a country run by Kiwis. And if you saw what happened with the local government, KCDC this week, where if you go into public forum now, if it's not on the agenda, you're not allowed to talk. You know, that's not our way. Kiwis like to have a say about an issue, and they're there as our public servants, and they should be allowed to. But now they put you back to later in the day. Now, their way, it quickly starts to rub away our rights. Then we feel, like I feel really inadequate to go there, you know, because they made the rules, that what you have to say and how long you're to speak. We have a Māori organisation within KCDC now who does exactly the same to Māori. 3 minutes, and I think that'll be the day I wouldn't even bother going to take leadership. You know, I'll never get over in 3 minutes. But that is how it sneaks in, and it just sneaked into KCDC this week. So that's how we start to lose our confidence in standing up in public, I believe, anyway. And having come from that world of not wanting to be in the public eye. And here I am more than ever. So I can understand the question, having been there. But let's not let them take away that democratic right. I'm actually going down south this year, in a couple of weeks' time, to listen to a democratic school presentation from an Israeli guy, you know, and they run these democratic schools, and there's one in Christchurch. And I've done workshops with democratic. We haven't got a democratic society. No such thing here in New Zealand. You know, until you actually go through a workshop of what democratic means, actually you'll find out we've never had it here. You know, where we've all got one thing we want, and how do we get it? How do we all share it? This country doesn't do that. So let's get a Kiwi way, because the Kiwi way will change. There's Maori values that can bring that back, and I keep telling our Māoris that. Let's get round the meeting house and discuss an issue. Don't leave until you actually got the answer. You know, that was our old way, and people didn't like taking the time. We're too much in a hurry for what? We're in a 6 foot box down under the earth. That's what we're hurrying for. So that's my view.
I'd like to say that Arnie talked about manaakitanga and about talking to your families. And when I'm biking to school with my kids on the back, we're talking about climate change. We're talking about why we're biking and all those big kind of things. And I don't know what my children are going to do. I know one of them wants to be Katy Perry, but at least she might be singing about, Pay Paradise or something like that instead. So that's where something that we can all do. Particularly, there's a lot of older people in the audiences talking to your grandchildren exactly the way that that Arnie was talking about, and particularly if the parents are too busy to have the conversations. If you can create time to do that, you're going to plant those seeds. So we've got time for maybe 2 more questions, and then we're way over time already. So has anyone else got anything else that they want to do? Anything else? Yeah, right at the back, your hand's gone up.
I just wanted to ask Amanda about how she sees peer-to-peer lending fitting into an alternative economy.
Look, I think that's fantastic, but it's really just a sort of a one tier down from a the cooperative or a bank like that has 100% lending. Having said that, if we get a financial crash and the banks collapse, you're not going to have any open bank resolutions set on you. You're going to get your money back and your friend's going to. But I think the more of that we do, the better. But you've got to remember, as a whole nation, if we paid back all our debts, there'd be no money in the economy at all. Or it would be very little, so you wouldn't be able to do that. So ultimately, it's not a solution to the big picture, but on an individual level, I think it's a great idea for your own protection economically. Yeah, I think alternative currencies are also an excellent idea if you can get them to work. Bianca's gone, so I'll take the next question.
Just following on from that, I heard that Iceland, to some extent, opted out of the world banking system. And last I heard it was doing pretty well. And I wondered if you had any update on, any encouraging words on it. And could I say, it was probably just an oversight, but please could you use the term humankind rather than mankind?
Okay, I'm just going to repeat the question. Are you pleased I used the word humankind?
Please don't use the word mankind. Please could you use the word humankind?
Oh, okay.
As more inclusive of us women.
Okay, right. I use humankind instead of mankind. And also, it was just asked me to comment about Iceland. I don't follow that closely. What Iceland have recently done is jail their bankers for, which nobody else in the world has done, and there's been a huge mainstream media blackout on it, which should ring alarm bells just for the way our media and our democracy and our society works. These things aren't even being reported to us. But Iceland they didn't bail out the banks, and that's fantastic. But it's not like they've gone to a system where the banks cannot create credit and money out of thin air and then charge interest on it and then use the land and the resources and future human labour as collateral against those loans. So in the big picture, they haven't actually solved a big problem. They've just refused to bail out in the same way America did. But good on them. It's a step in the right direction. And it's very encouraging. So, yeah.
Thank you. Great. One more? Anyone got one more question? Yeah.
For you, Jevon.
Yes.
You talked about there's some risks about using social media. I was interested in what those risks were.
Excuse me, Giovanni, could you speak more slowly so we can hear what you're saying, please?
Sorry, it's yes, my Italian way. I will try to slow down. I can tell you what they were for me personally, because I was critical of Cameron Slater some time before the politics thing came out. He wrote things about me. Then later on he told he told journalists that the police knew it had something to do with the breaking into his computer. And so periodically I get phoned by a journalist wanting to confirm that. Some of the people who comment on his blog have made comments to me about my disabled daughter, that sort of thing. Which is fine, but I'm very fortunate, following on to what someone else said, I'm very fortunate in that my job is not, I'm an independent, I'm a freelancer, so my job is not at risk. I'm not a woman, and that's when I was campaigning against Radio Live, I was acutely aware that if I'd been a woman doing the same thing, the kind of, I got a lot of backlash, I got a lot of hate mail and that kind of stuff. But if I'd been a woman, it would have been of a different kind. And that's why I'm saying that I don't think we are very good at looking after each other on social media when these kind of, you become exposed because you wanted to become exposed, you wanted to do something. And when the backlash comes, we are not very good at protecting each other. Even though we are we support each other's goals, we're not very good at creating a little barrier for that. It's sort of a support group. Yeah, it's almost seen as it's a price of the little bit of celebrity that comes with it. It's almost a reward for that act anyway, because that's the currency of social media. The currency of social media is that you're going to get more followers and you're going to get a bigger audience. But we discount the fact that actually that comes with risk. I think Marian Evans has spoken and is going to speak in this series next week. Marian Evans has written a beautiful blog post called Safety in Paradise that I invite everyone who wants to come next week to read ahead of the meeting, in which she talks about a lifetime of being a feminist, and a fairly radical one, and how she negotiates every issue she talks about based on what the risks that she can see. What kind of attacks am I going to get? Who's going to protect me from those attacks? That's the kind of thing. They're not limited to social media. Mike Joy got in trouble. A lot of critics get in trouble without having to be on social media. But social media has a way of making it very easy for people to attack you. And so you've got to be a little bit prepared for that. And also you're going to be prepared to help others when you see them in that situation.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thanks everyone. So I'd like to just say on that note that the more that all of us are doing this kind of thing, the more normal it becomes as well, which is in itself a bit of a safety net. So that's just another one of my 2 cents. So I'd just like to thank my speakers, Ani Parata, and Giovanni Tiso, and Amanda Vickers. Thank you. Thank you. And just also to Mahara for having it here with this wonderful exhibition by John Foster, and a reminder that Mahara does have a donation box on the way out, so it would be wonderful if you could make a contribution to have more fora like this, as well as expanding the gallery. Yep, Jenna?
I'd just like to say thanks to Graham Joyce
from
Coast Access Radio, and Gary and James, who've all been supporting the recording with their time. Thanks very much.
And a reminder that if you don't want to be recorded, to come up and let one of us know, so that we can edit you out. And I'll just finish up. And my apologies to those of you that are coming to more than one of these forum. There is some repetition. I've tried to mix it up a bit, but there are some things that do require repeating. This is from Naomi Klein again. It seems to me as I was sitting here that on one hand we have this panel here also by John Foster, which shows us our natural world with the blues and the greens and the sky and the grass as it was created for us, or as it came to be, whatever. And then we have on the other panel what we tend to do when we get a bit of power within us. So my drive is to try and keep things this way as much as we possibly can, which is a journey for all of us. And the more of us that are doing it, the better, because actually the current system's not going to do it for us. The current system of banking and corporates and the political system actually have a vested interest in things staying this way. They have an interest. And Naomi Klein sums that up by saying this: politicians aren't the only ones with the power to declare a crisis. Mass movements of regular people can declare one too. Slavery wasn't a crisis for British and American elites until abolitionism turned it into one. Racial discrimination wasn't a crisis until the civil rights movement turned it into one. Sex discrimination wasn't a crisis until feminism turned it into one. Apartheid wasn't a crisis until the anti-apartheid movement turned it into one. In the same way, if enough of us stop looking away and decide that climate change is a crisis worthy of response, then it will become one. Thanks, everyone.